There are moments in life when destiny knocks at your door disguised as tragedy. For Emeline Winrose, that moment came on an April afternoon, when her uncle spoke the name of a man who would change everything, Lord Theston Vale. Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to a story about how true love can bloom in the most unexpected places. Today we'll meet Emeline, a young orphan who will discover that sometimes what seems like the end is merely the beginning of something extraordinary. If you enjoy historical romances filled with depth and emotion, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. And please listen until the end. I promise this story will touch your heart in ways you don't expect. Hudson River Valley, New York Colony, Spring 1775. The cream linen fabric slid between Emeline Winrose's fingers as she embroidered, seated by the parlor window. The soft April afternoon light filtered through the plain curtains, casting golden patterns across the worn wooden floor. At 20 years old, she carried that peculiar serenity of women who had learned early on that life rarely asks permission before rewriting our plans. It had been 5 years since her parents' carriage overturned on the dusty road leading to Albany. 5 years since she left the small house where she grew up and found shelter at the Winrose estate. The sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway alerted her. Colonel William Winrose entered. The room with the expression Emeline knew all too well, the face of a man about to make difficult decisions in the name of greater needs. Emeline, her uncle's voice cut through the silence like a sharp blade. She didn't lift her eyes from the embroidery right away, as if she could delay the inevitable by focusing on the blooming red rose beneath her needle. When she finally looked up, she found in her uncle and Aunt Margaret's faces that mix of embarrassment and determination she knew perfectly well. Lord Theston Vale has requested your hand in marriage. The words fell into the air like stones dropped into a still lake. The embroidery slipped from Emeline's hands, and something inside her chest tightened. Not surprise, for she had expected this moment since turning 20, but a kind of melancholy resignation. The Lord's name echoed throughout the Hudson Valley like a whispered legend. Theston Vale, an English nobleman who had left his homeland 15 years earlier to build his fortune in the colonies. Master of silver mines and vast lands. A 35-year-old man who had turned intelligence and hard work into considerable wealth. It was said he never smiled in public, and that his manner remained as silent as an abandoned cathedral. He is, Emeline began, her voice weaker than she intended. He's a man of integrity and prosperity, the colonel interrupted, hands clasped behind his back. Our family needs this union, girl. He said nothing more. He didn't have to. Emeline perfectly understood the unspoken language of adults. The growing debts, the poor harvests of the past 2 years, the increasing tension between colonists and the crown that threatened everyone's livelihood. She knew her destiny had always been tied to the needs of others. She was an orphan with no dowry in a society that measured a woman's worth in acres of land and promises of wealth. Her only value lay in sealing alliances. When? She asked simply, folding the embroidery on her lap. The wedding will be held at the Episcopal Church of Philadelphia in 2 months, Aunt Margaret replied, nervously adjusting the pleats of her pale blue dress. We'll have time to prepare a proper trousseau. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of blooming apple trees from the orchard, and Emeline closed her eyes. She imagined herself as one of those blossoms, beautiful while clinging to the branches but destined to go wherever the wind took them. Will he come to visit before the wedding? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Something deep inside her longed, at the very least, to meet the man before vowing eternal obedience. What if he's cruel? She thought, her chest tightening. What if he's one of those heartless men, cold as the steel he draws from his mines? The colonel exchanged a look with his wife. Lord Vale is occupied with urgent business at his mines. He prefers that you get acquainted properly during the ceremony. Of course, Emeline thought, feeling fear settle like ice in her veins. He doesn't even think it necessary to see me before deciding I'll be his wife. Perhaps I'm just another acquisition to him, another property to be managed. My God, what if he's a cold, harsh man? What if I don't like him? But she only said, I understand. That night, kneeling before the small oratory that had belonged to her mother, the only inheritance she had brought from her previous life, Emeline prayed. She didn't ask to escape the marriage. She knew that was impossible. She only asked for strength to keep her dignity, to find some purpose in a life she hadn't chosen. On the cherrywood rosary beads, she found the rhythm of a prayer that would become her anchor in the days to come. What Emeline didn't know, as the silver moon rose over the Hudson Valley, was that at that very moment, miles away, a solitary man walked through the dark tunnels of his minds, holding a lantern and wondering whether he would ever find someone capable of lighting the empty corridors of his soul. Theston Vale wasn't looking for love. He only sought companionship, someone to fill the oppressive silence of Vale Manor. But destiny, as Emeline would soon discover, had far more intricate plans than mere convenience. Madame Claire Beaumont's atelier was perfumed with French lavender, and the constant murmur of needles sliding across imported silks. Emeline stood still on the small platform, while the seamstress, a middle-aged woman with a still heavy Parisian accent, adjusted the measurements of the wedding gown with the precision of an artist. "Mademoiselle has the perfect waist for this silhouette," Madame Beaumont remarked, pinning along the ivory satin bodice. "Lord Vale chose well, chose well." The words echoed strangely in Emeline's ears, as if she were a piece of furniture being appraised for its functionality and appearance. Aunt Margaret, seated in a burgundy velvet armchair, smiled with the expression of someone finally seeing old plans come to fruition. "The fabric arrived from London," the seamstress explained, smoothing the wide pleats of the skirt. "Pure silk, hand-embroidered with silver thread." Emeline observed her reflection in the full-length mirror. The young woman staring back seemed like a beautifully dressed stranger, someone playing a role she didn't feel ready for. The gown was magnificent, certainly, but it weighed on her shoulders like armor against an unknown future. "The veil is still missing," murmured Madame Beaumont, pulling from a blue satin-lined box a cascade of French tulle embroidered with delicate flowers in silver thread. "It belonged to Lord Vale's late mother. He insisted that you wear it." Emeline's heart quickened. Wearing Lady Vale's veil meant being accepted into a lineage, not only inheriting a name, but other people's memories. She felt simultaneously honored and intimidated by the responsibility. Over the following hours, gowns for receptions, walking attire, and muslin dressing robes for the intimate moments of home paraded through the atelier. Each piece was chosen by Aunt Margaret, with the care of someone preparing a family representative for the theater of colonial high society. "Lord Vale sent this," her aunt said, pulling a dark green velvet case from her bag. Emeline opened it with trembling fingers. Resting on white satin was a necklace of emeralds interspersed with diamonds, accompanied by matching earrings and a bracelet. The brilliance of the stones was dazzling, but it was the attached note that truly stirred something inside her. "To the one who will bring light to the silent halls of Vale Manor, with respect and hope. TV, hope." The word danced in her mind like a butterfly landing on a flower. Perhaps this unknown man also harbored apprehensions about the arranged marriage. Perhaps he too wondered whether affection could grow on the foundations of convenience. Perhaps he wasn't as cold as she thought. That night, back in her modest bedroom at her aunt and uncle's house, Emeline found a sealed envelope on her desk bearing the Vale crest. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was firm, almost severe. "Miss Winrose, it is with deep respect that I address you at this singular moment in our lives. I understand that the circumstances of our union are, to say the least, unconventional. We have not met. We have not exchanged a single word. And yet, in a few weeks we will be bound by the sacred vows of matrimony. I am not a man of flowery words or empty promises. But I can offer you this, my commitment to safeguard your well-being, my word that you will be treated with all the dignity you deserve, and my sincere wish that in time, we may find not merely mutual tolerance but true companionship. Vale Manor awaits your presence, and I await the chance to meet the woman who, they tell me, possesses not only beauty, but a kind heart. With genuine esteem, Theston Vale." Emeline read and reread the letter until the words were etched in her memory. There was something in the raw honesty of those lines, in the admission that he too faced uncertainties, that touched her deeply. He didn't pretend it would be love at first sight. He didn't promise instant passion, But he offered respect, dignity, and the possibility that something deeper could grow. For the first time since her uncle spoke Theston Vale's name, Emeline felt something beyond resignation. She felt a faint spark of curiosity, hope? Perhaps. She sat at the desk, dipped the quill into the inkwell, and began to write. Lord Vale, your letter touched me with a sincerity rarely found in formal correspondence. I thank you for not offering promises that neither of us can truly guarantee to keep. I too face this marriage with uncertainty, but your words of respect and dignity comfort me far more than any premature declarations of affection ever could. Perhaps true fortune lies not in beginning with passion, but in building something solid on foundations of mutual honesty. I await our meeting with cautious but genuine hope. Respectfully, Emeline Winrose. She sealed the letter and handed it to the messenger who would leave at dawn. Later that night, for the first time in weeks, she slept without the crushing weight of anxiety on her chest. And miles away, when Theston Vale read Emeline's reply by candlelight in his solitary study, something inside him, something he had long believed dead, stirred faintly. Perhaps this union of convenience could grow into something neither of them yet dared to name. 2 months later, the pealing of the Episcopal church bells in Philadelphia echoed through the June morning like a heavenly proclamation. Carriages belonging to illustrious families lined up before the Lightstone Temple, while the colonial city donned its finest attire to witness the union of Lord Theston Vale and Miss Emeline Winrose, an event that stirred not only high society but also the pages of the local newspapers. In the sacred silence of the sacristy, Emeline adjusted the pleats of her wedding gown, while the scent of white lilies filled the air. Aunt Margaret, dressed in peacock blue silk, added the finishing touches to the veil that had belonged to the groom's late mother, a symbolic gesture that made Emeline feel as though she were being welcomed into a story far greater than her own. You look beautiful, my dear, her aunt murmured, genuine emotion in her voice. Your mother would be proud. The organ began its solemn opening chords, and Emeline took a deep breath. It was time to walk toward a destiny she had accepted with resignation, but which perhaps, just perhaps, she could embrace with hope. Colonel Winrose offered her his arm, and together they left the refuge of the sacristy to face the curious eyes of colonial society. The nave of the church shone with hundreds of candles and arrangements of white roses. In the front rows, she recognized faces of the colonial aristocracy, all clad in their finest silks and displaying precious jewels. But it was when she lifted her gaze that her heart skipped a beat. Theston Vale stood waiting at the altar. Dressed in a flawless black tailcoat and a white silk cravat, he carried a presence that went beyond attire. Tall, broad-shouldered, a body shaped not only by status but by years of physical work in the mines. Dark brown hair was carefully combed in formal style. Her first impression was of almost intimidating seriousness, the angular face marked by lines of responsibility, the rigid posture of a man bearing the weight of a title, the controlled expression that revealed nothing. Cold was Emeline's first thought, her stomach tightening. Exactly as I feared, but then her eyes met his, a deep grayish blue like the ocean in a storm. And there, in the depths of that impossible color, something stirred, something his composed expression tried to conceal but couldn't completely. Vulnerability, perhaps, or uncertainty. Something unknown and intriguing pulsed behind the mask of composure. And then, so subtle it could have been imagined, the corner of his lips lifted. It wasn't a smile, merely the ghost of one, a hint of warmth fighting to emerge through layers of carefully built reserve. He isn't cold, Emeline corrected herself, feeling something tighten in her chest. He's nervous, perhaps even frightened. Theston watched her with an intensity that made the air between them feel heavier. It wasn't possessive, that intensity. It was reverent, as if he were beholding something precious and feared breaking it with a careless touch. Emeline's footsteps echoed on the polished marble, keeping time with an inner melody of anxiety and strange anticipation. When she finally reached the altar, Theston extended his gloved hand. His fingers trembled slightly. He's nervous, Emeline realized with a surprising warmth. As nervous as I am, Reverend Jonathan Matthews, renowned for his eloquent sermons, began the ceremony with a solemn voice that resonated through the Gothic arches. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the presence of our Lord to witness the sacred union of these two hearts, joined in the indissoluble bond of matrimony. The words of the Book of Common Prayer flowed like an ancient river, carrying centuries of tradition and hope. Emeline repeated her vows without taking her eyes off Theston's face, searching for sincerity in each spoken word. Emeline Winrose, take thee, Theston Vale, to be my lawful husband, to have and to hold, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, all the days of my life. Her voice was clear and steady, steadier than she expected. Theston replied, and for the first time, she heard his voice beyond the written words in letters. It was deep, measured, with a faint English accent that had not faded despite his years in the colonies. I, Theston Vale, take thee, Emeline Winrose, to be my lawful wife, pledging to be your devoted protector and loyal companion, honoring you as the partner God has entrusted to me, all the days of my life. Protector, companion, words he had chosen carefully for his personal vows, subtly diverging from the traditional liturgy. There was something deeply personal in that promise, as if Theston understood she came to him not out of love, but necessity, and wished to elevate that arrangement into something nobler. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Theston stepped closer with a hesitation Emeline hadn't expected. Instead of the passionate kiss some grooms displayed, he gently took her gloved hand and lifted it to his lips, kissing it with the reverence of a gentleman courting a noble lady. The gesture spoke of patience, of respect, of a silent promise that intimacy would blossom naturally, without haste, without pressure. The bells rang triumphantly and the guests erupted in polite applause. Emeline glanced at Theston once more and saw, for a fleeting instant, a genuine smile light up his usually serious face. It was a quiet smile, almost shy, but it transformed his severe features completely, revealing the man behind the mask of the solitary lord. Perhaps, Emeline thought as they walked together down the aisle toward the sunlight, perhaps there is hope after all. But as they crossed the church doors toward their uncertain future, neither of them could imagine the surprises destiny had in store. This would not be merely a marriage of convenience. It would be a journey of revelations, testing not only their ability to love, but their courage to forgive, their strength to fight together, and their faith that even the loneliest hearts can find a safe harbor. The carriage awaited, decorated with white ribbons and flowers. And when Theston helped Emeline step inside, his fingers lingered a few seconds longer than necessary on hers. A brief touch, laden with unspoken promises, the beginning of a story neither of them had written, but one they were, in that very moment, beginning to long to discover together. The carriage glided along winding roads that curled through the wooded hills of the Hudson Valley. Emeline watched from the window as the landscape gradually transformed. Dense forests of oaks and pines, giving way to cultivated fields, then to orderly vineyards stretching over gentle slopes. At her side, Theston kept a respectful distance, though the carriage's tight space forced them into a closeness both felt with acute awareness. He pointed out regional landmarks with the courtesy of a host receiving an esteemed guest. Yet there was something else in his voice, a note of genuine pride when he spoke of the land he had made his home. There, he said, indicating with a gloved hand a structure emerging among the trees, is the first sight of Vale Manor. Emeline followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. The mansion rose in stately grace on a soft hill, its imported glass windows reflecting the setting sun like watchful golden eyes. The architecture blended Georgian elements with colonial touches, white columns supporting a generous portico, red brick laid in elegant patterns, formal gardens unfolding in perfect symmetry around the main house. It wasn't ostentatious. It was imposing, solid, like the man who had built it. "It's magnificent," Emeline murmured, sincere admiration in her voice. For the first time, she saw Theston smile, not the discreet smile from the ceremony, but something more spontaneous that lit his gray-blue eyes. "My father drew the plans before he died. He wanted Vale Manor to be not only a prosperous estate, but a home where future generations could flourish." The word generations hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken implications. Emeline felt heat rise in her cheeks, and lowered her gaze to her gloved hands folded in her lap. The carriage stopped before the main staircase, where uniformed servants waited in respectful formation. Theston stepped down first and offered his hand to help her alight. When their fingers touched, even through gloves, Emeline felt something, a subtle spark, like static after a storm. Theston's eyes met hers for a lingering moment, and she realized he had felt it too. "Welcome to your home, Lady Vale," he said, and the title sounded strange and new to her ears. A woman in middle age, dressed in a flawless gray gown and immaculate white apron, approached with dignified steps. Her intelligent eyes assessed Emeline with respectful curiosity. "This is Mrs. Beatrice Ashford," Theston introduced. "She has overseen Vale Manor since before I arrived in the colonies. She knows every inch of this place better than I do." "Most welcome, milady," Mrs. Beatrice said, offering a graceful curtsy. "The house has been in need of a mistress to bring life to its rooms." There was something maternal in the woman's presence that made Emeline feel less alone in the grand surroundings. Theston led her through the principal rooms, each space revealing layers of his personality that letters had not shown. The main hall with polished mahogany furniture and English tapestries. The library with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with volumes in multiple languages. Evidence of a man who prized knowledge over empty ornamentation. The music room with a Viennese harpsichord awaiting skillful hands. But it was in the study that Emeline truly glimpsed the man behind the title. Maps of the mines covered an entire wall. Account books were organized with meticulous precision. And on the desk sat a small silver-framed miniature, a middle-aged couple, clearly his parents. "They died when I was 20, Theston said softly, following her gaze. "Yellow fever, it was swift." The old sorrow in his voice echoed something deep within Emeline. "I was 15 when I lost mine. Carriage accident." Their eyes met, and in that instant something shifted. They were no longer strangers bound by convenience. They were two souls who knew the particular loneliness of early orphanhood. Theston took a step toward her, then stopped, as if suddenly recalling convention. "I've prepared the room in the east wing for you," he said, his voice a bit rougher. "It overlooks the gardens and catches the morning light. I thought that, until you feel completely at ease in Vale Manor, it would be more appropriate for us to have separate rooms." The delicacy of the gesture moved Emeline deeply. In a society where conjugal rights were often deemed unquestionable, Theston offered her time, space, respect. "I'm grateful for your consideration," she replied, genuine gratitude in her voice. He led her upstairs. The room he had chosen was spacious and airy, decorated in shades of cream and soft green. A mahogany canopy bed draped with muslin dominated the space, while a desk by the window waited for letters she might write. On the dressing table, a bouquet of white peonies perfumed the air with gentle sweetness. "If you need anything, Mrs. Beatrice will always be available," Theston said, pausing on the threshold. Then he hesitated, as if wrestling with words he wished to speak but feared their consequence. "Emeline." It was the first time he had used her name without formality. "Yes?" She turned to face him fully. The evening light filtered through the window, casting golden halos around them both. Theston looked at her with an intensity that quickened her heart, not with fear, but with something more complex. Admiration, restrained desire, vulnerability. "I hope that in time you may truly feel at home here, and that I—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in an unconscious gesture of nerves. "That I may become worthy of the trust you place in me." Emeline took a step toward him, narrowing the space between them. She was close enough now to see details the church candles hadn't revealed. Faint lines at the corners of his eyes, speaking of years under the sun. A small scar at his left temple, the way his lips curved slightly even when he tried to keep a serious expression. He was a very handsome man. Not with the delicate looks of city gentlemen, but with the masculine beauty of someone who had known hard work and didn't hide it. "Theston," she said softly, and saw his eyes widen just a little at hearing his name on her lips. "You've already shown more dignity in a few hours than many men show in years of marriage. That means a great deal to me." For a moment he seemed to battle the urge to touch her. His hand lifted slightly, then fell back to his side. The visible effort at self-control made something tighten in Emeline's chest. He desires me, she realized in surprise. But he restrains himself out of respect for me. The discovery was at once terrifying and thrilling. "Good night, Emeline," he said at last, his voice hoarse. "Rest. Tomorrow, if you wish, I can show you the rest of the estate. I would like that very much." He nodded and withdrew, closing the door softly behind him. Emeline stood motionless for a long moment, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart beat fast. That first night at Vale Manor, kneeling before the small oratory Theston had ordered placed in her room, she did not ask only for strength to adapt. She asked for wisdom to understand the confused feelings beginning to unfurl within her. And while the silver moon rose over the gardens, she pictured Theston in his own rooms, perhaps as sleepless as she, perhaps also wondering if two strangers might, after all, find paths leading them to something deeper than mere convenience. Desire was there, silent, respectful, but undeniably present. And for the first time, Emeline allowed herself to imagine not merely tolerating her husband's touch, but wanting it. 3 weeks had passed since Emeline's arrival at Vale Manor, and a delicate routine was beginning to form between them. Mornings found them sharing breakfast together on the terrace overlooking the gardens, exchanging remarks about the weather and the work being done on the estate. Theston showed endless patience as she adjusted to the rhythms of this new life, while Emeline gradually uncovered the layers that made up her husband's personality. He was gentler than his reputation suggested, lonelier than any man ought to be, and infinitely more observant than she had imagined. That July afternoon, the sky was brushed in orange hues as Theston invited her for a walk through the gardens. They strolled in companionable silence along the rose-lined paths, where the sweet fragrance mingled with the breeze drifting down from the hills. Emeline noticed how he knew each plant by name, touching the petals delicately as if greeting old friends. There was an unexpected tenderness in those gestures, the stern man of the mines revealing a side few ever witnessed. "My mother planted this rose bush the year I was born," he said, pausing before a shrub heavy with ivory blossoms. "She used to say each rose was a prayer of gratitude for the family God had given her." It was the first time Theston had spoken spontaneously about his parents, and Emeline recognized the opportunity to know him more deeply. "They must have been extraordinary people to raise someone like you," she said softly. Theston smiled with a touch of melancholy, and in that smile she glimpsed the shadow of the boy who had lost his parents far too young. They were. "My father had a sense of justice that often clashed with the customs of the time. My mother had the gift of turning any place into a true home." They sat on a marble bench beneath a pergola, draped with wisteria, and Emeline noticed Theston struggling with words he clearly wanted to say but feared the consequences of. "Emeline," he began at last, his tone making something tighten in her chest. "There's something I need to tell you. About your family, about your parents." Her heart sped up. For years she had accepted the official version of her parents' deaths, a carriage accident on the road to Albany, while traveling on business. But something in his grave tone suggested the truth was far more complex. "Your parents didn't die by accident," he continued, staring at his hands as though seeking courage there. "They were, well, someone plotted against their lives." The word hung beneath the wisteria like distant thunder. Emeline felt the world tilt ever so slightly. "What?" Her voice came out as a whisper. Theston turned fully to face her, and in his gray-blue eyes she saw a mixture of pain and determination. "Your parents uncovered a fraudulent scheme involving forged property titles. Small farmers were being robbed through falsified documents. Your father, being the honorable man he was, planned to report everything to the authorities in Albany." The pieces began to fall into place in Emeline's mind, the whispered conversations she'd overheard as a child. Her father's nervousness in the weeks before the trip, the inexplicable haste. "Who?" she asked, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Who killed them?" "Sebastian Hartwell. He was a foreman on an estate near your family's. He worked for a corrupt lawyer named Dr. Tobias Aldridge, forging documents. When your parents uncovered the scheme..." He paused as if the next words caused him physical pain. "Sebastian deliberately got the carriage driver drunk. He knew the mountain roads were far too dangerous for a drunk man to control the horses." The silence that followed was thick as fog. Emeline processed the revelation that her parents hadn't died by cruel fate but had been struck down because they sought to protect the innocent. There was nobility in their deaths that she had never imagined. Tears began streaming down her cheeks, but they weren't only tears of pain. There was a strange sense of pride mixed in. Her parents had died defending what was right. "Why are you telling me this now?" she finally asked. Theston reached out, hesitated for a second, then gently brushed away one of her tears with his thumb. The touch was brief but burned like a coal against her skin. Because Sebastian Hartwell is imprisoned in Albany. Because he was tried and convicted for other crimes. And because... He paused, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Because when I learned of your family's situation after your parents' deaths, I saw in this marriage not just convenience, but an opportunity to honor the memory of people of integrity. I wanted to protect you, to give you the security your parents would have wanted for you." Emeline looked at Theston with new eyes. The man society saw merely as a wealthy, solitary lord was, in truth, someone who carried the weight of justice on his shoulders. Someone who turned his wealth into a tool for reparation. "There's more," he continued. And now his voice held something different, a vulnerability she rarely saw in him. "Sebastian has a daughter, Mary, 15 years old. She works as a laundress in Albany to keep from starving. She's a good girl who doesn't deserve to pay for her father's sins." Emeline's heart clenched. A functional orphan just as she herself had been. "Where can I find her?" she asked, surprising herself as much as she surprised him. "Why do you want to know?" Emeline rose from the bench and walked to the balustrade overlooking the fields. The afternoon breeze stirred her loose hair, and she felt Theston step closer behind her, not invading her space, but offering his presence as silent comfort. "Because I've learned something," she said, turning to face him. They were so close now that she could see the darker flecks of blue in his eyes. "I've learned that true honor for the dead doesn't lie in cultivating hatred for their wrongdoers. It lies in preventing others from suffering the same harm." The admiration she saw in Theston's eyes warmed her from the inside out. "You are extraordinary," he murmured, and there was something dangerous in the way he looked at her, like he was fighting against the impulse to touch her more than he should. "I'm not," Emeline replied, but she couldn't look away. "I just don't want hatred to define who I am. My parents wouldn't have wanted that." Theston raised his hand slowly, giving her time to step back if she wished. When she didn't move, his fingers touched her face gently, tracing the line of her jaw with a reverence that made her stomach tighten. "If you wish," he said, his voice rough, "we can go to Albany tomorrow. You can meet Mary. We can offer her a home here, an education, a chance at a decent life. Together?" Emeline asked, and the word carried far more weight than just the travel plan. "Together," he confirmed. And there, beneath the fragrant wisteria as the sun set over Vale Manor, something fundamental shifted between them. They were no longer strangers bound by convenience. They were partners joined by shared values and a mutual desire to turn tragedy into redemption. When Theston leaned slightly toward her, the world around them seemed to slow down. Emeline didn't step back, nor did she move forward, caught in that liminal space between fear and desire, between what was safe and what could change everything. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain he could hear it. Or perhaps it was his heartbeat echoing in the narrow space between their bodies. Theston's gaze dropped to her lips, not quickly, not furtively, deliberately. It was a silent question, hanging in the air like a woven thread of promise and uncertainty. Then his eyes returned to hers, seeking not just permission, but reciprocity. Emeline felt her own lips part slightly. An involuntary response she couldn't stop. He moved closer, so slowly she could have retreated at any moment. But she didn't. The space between them shrank until only centimeters remained, then millimeters, and then the faintest of touches. It wasn't a kiss. Not fully. It was a brush of lips so light it could have been imagined. The texture of his mouth against hers in a suspended moment. Warm, incredibly intimate. More provocation than fulfillment, more question than answer. Emeline shivered, a subtle tremor that ran through her entire body like a ripple through still water. Theston felt it. His eyes opened, meeting hers just inches away. In that impossible closeness, she saw something that stole her breath. It wasn't triumph. It was wonder, as if he too was discovering something new and frightening. "Emeline," he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded different. It wasn't Lady Vale, it wasn't formality. It was raw intimacy, vulnerable. He pulled back a few inches. Not much, just enough for her to breathe. His hands found her waist with reverent hesitation, resting there as if asking permission for every millimeter of contact. "Forgive me," he said, his voice hoarse with restraint. "I shouldn't have. Don't want to frighten you." But Emeline noticed something fascinating. His hands were trembling slightly against her waist. This powerful man, lord of lands and mines, was trembling. For her. "You didn't frighten me," she whispered, surprised by her own courage. One of her hands rose to touch his chest lightly, feeling his heart racing beneath layers of fabric. You're nervous." Theston's eyes closed briefly. "Terrified," he admitted. "Of doing something wrong. Of moving too fast. Of losing you before I truly have you." The raw honesty of those words unraveled something deep inside Emeline. He wasn't trying to seduce her with rehearsed lines or calculated charm. He was simply being real. "You won't lose me," she said softly. "But perhaps we need time to understand this." She made a small gesture between them, this new, frightening thing blossoming between them. Theston nodded but didn't release her entirely. His hands still rested on her waist and she didn't push them away. His touch was comforting, an anchor in the storm of confusing emotions. "Time," he repeated. "We can take our time." Then, with a tenderness that made her want to cry, he lifted a hand and brushed away a stray lock of hair the wind had blown across her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "But you need to know, Emeline. I'm beginning to feel things I didn't expect to feel. Things that scare me with their intensity." "I am too," she admitted. And it was the absolute truth. Desire was there, undeniable, pulsing in the air between them like a living thing. But something deeper was growing. Something far more dangerous than mere physical attraction. Admiration was turning into respect, and respect was blossoming into something neither dared to name aloud yet. They stayed like that for a long time. So close they shared the same air, but without crossing that final line. It was sweet torture, the wanting without having, the desire without consummation. Finally, Theston stepped back, and the cool night air filled the space where his warmth had been. "Good night, Emeline," he said, and there was promise in those simple words. A promise that this, whatever this was, would continue, grow, mature in its own time. "Good night, Theston." That night, Emeline couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, gazing at the gardens bathed in moonlight, her fingers pressed against lips that still tingled with the memory of that almost kiss. It hadn't been enough. And at the same time, it was almost too much. She caught herself imagining what it would have been like if he hadn't restrained himself, if he had deepened that touch into a real kiss. The thought made her blush in the darkness, and she pressed her hands to her heated cheeks. "I'm in trouble," she thought, "because I can't imagine my life without him anymore." And in his chambers on the other side of the manor, Theston lay equally sleepless. He paced back and forth like a caged animal, running a hand through his hair repeatedly. He had crossed an invisible boundary tonight. He no longer saw Emeline as merely a wife of convenience, if he had ever truly seen her that way, to be honest with himself. Now he recognized her for what she truly was, the woman who could finally fill the emptiness he had carried for so long, the woman who was already beginning to fill every empty corner of his being, and that terrified him in a way that facing hardship, storms, or armed criminals never had, because Emeline had the power to destroy him completely, and he was discovering, with growing awe, that he would give her that power willingly. The journey to Albany unfolded in a silence unlike that of the first weeks. It was no longer the uncomfortable quiet of strangers, but something denser, charged with mutual awareness. Every sway of the carriage brought them involuntarily closer, and Emeline could feel the warmth of Theston's body through the layers of fabric between them. He kept his eyes fixed on the landscape passing by the window, but his jaw was tight. His left hand rested on the seat between them, so close that Emeline needed only to move a few centimeters to touch it. She didn't, but the desire burned like an ember beneath her skin. "We can still turn back," Theston said suddenly, turning to face her. The morning light streaming through the window illuminated his profile, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the sensual curve of his lips. There's no dishonor in not being ready for this confrontation. Emeline held his gaze, and something passed between them, an electric current that made the air in the carriage feel thinner. "I need to do this," she replied, her voice coming out rougher than she intended. "For my parents, for myself." Theston nodded slowly, then did something that surprised her. He reached out and intertwined his fingers with hers. It wasn't a casual gesture, it was deliberate, intimate, laden with meaning. "Then we'll do it together," he said, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. The touch sent waves of heat up Emeline's arm, spreading through her entire body, warming her heart. It was just hand-holding, but it felt infinitely more intimate than that. The Albany prison was a grim gray stone building, where the smell of mildew mingled with the pungent odor of human misery. The gaunt, weary-faced jailer led them through narrow, damp corridors to a cell where Sebastian Hartwell awaited. The man who rose from a wooden cot barely resembled the overseer Theston had once known. Gray hair, a face etched with deep lines, trembling hands that spoke of someone consumed by remorse. "Lord Vale," Sebastian murmured, lowering his eyes. Then he saw Emeline, and something inside him broke. "Miss, you must be—" "I'm Emeline Winrose, daughter of John and Elizabeth Winrose." The name echoed through the damp cell, and Sebastian flinched as if struck. Theston stood behind Emeline, solid, protective, but not intrusive. She could feel him there, a safe harbor if she needed it. "My God," Sebastian whispered. I didn't know they had a daughter." "Tell her," Theston said firmly. "Tell her everything you confessed to me." Sebastian wrestled with the words as if facing an inner demon. Finally, he began to speak in a hoarse, broken voice, recounting every detail of the criminal scheme. How they forged documents for Dr. Tobias Aldridge, intimidated small farmers, and caused the deaths of the Winrose couple. "Your father was an honest man, milady. He uncovered our activities and planned to go to the authorities. Dr. Aldridge panicked, terrified of losing everything. He ordered me to stop their journey. And how did you stop them?" Emeline's voice came out surprisingly calm. "I got the coachman drunk the night before they were to leave. I knew the mountain roads were too dangerous for a drunk man to control the horses." His voice faltered. "Now I know I lost far more than dirty money. I lost my soul. My daughter is ashamed of me. I can't look in the mirror without seeing a murderer. I regret it, and will keep regretting it for the rest of my miserable days." Emeline looked at this man, broken under the weight of his own choices. She had expected to feel anger, a thirst for revenge. But what arose in her chest was something unexpected, a kind of pity she didn't fully understand. "Do you have family?" she asked. The question seemed to surprise Sebastian as much as it surprised Theston. "I have a daughter, Mary, 15. She works as a washerwoman to keep from starving. She's a good girl. She doesn't deserve to pay for her father's sins." She felt Theston take a step closer, his chest almost touching her back. She could feel the heat radiating from him, wrapping around her like a protective mantle. The nearness was electrifying. "Where can I find her?" Emeline asked. "Why do you want to know?" Sebastian's voice shook with disbelief. Emeline took a deep breath, acutely aware of Theston's body behind her, the way his presence strengthened her. "Because I'm going to offer her a home, an education, a chance at a decent life." The silence that followed was absolute. Sebastian stared at her as if she were a divine apparition. "I forgive you," Emeline finally said, and the words rang through the cell like church bells. "In the name of my parents, who were Christians and believed in the power of redemption, I forgive you." Sebastian collapsed to his knees on the damp straw, sobbing. "None of us deserves God's forgiveness," Emeline interrupted. "But he gives it to us anyway. And I need to forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to be free from the weight of hatred. Can't let pain and bitterness poison my heart." When they left the prison, the sunlight seemed brighter than before. Emeline was breathing heavily, the emotional weight of the confrontation finally crashing down on her. Theston led her to the carriage, but before she could climb in, he gently turned her to face him. His hands held her arms firmly, and she could see the burning admiration in his eyes. "You are the most extraordinary woman I've ever met," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Then right there on the street in Albany, with people passing by, he pulled her into an embrace. It wasn't appropriate. It wasn't what society expected, but it was necessary. Emeline sank against his chest, feeling Theston's strong arms around her, the quick beat of his heart against her ear. He smelled of aftershave, leather, pipe tobacco, and something uniquely masculine. It was comforting and delicious, Theston, she whispered against his chest. "I'm here," he replied, his hand sliding up to rest in her hair. "I'll always be here." They stayed like that for moments that felt suspended in time, both aware that the invisible thread binding them had transformed. It was no longer just physical attraction, nor mere consideration. It was a new bond, deeper than words, more dangerous than silence, more inevitable than fate. During the ride back, Emeline fell asleep, emotionally exhausted. Her head naturally slid onto Theston's shoulder, and he remained completely still, barely breathing. Afraid to wake her, he watched her as she slept, the delicate curve of her cheeks, the dark lashes against her pale skin, her lips slightly parted. Something in his chest tightened painfully. "I'm falling in love with my own wife," he realized in shock, "and I don't know what to do about it." When Emeline awoke, their eyes met, and for a moment filled with unspoken promises, neither of them moved. She was still leaning against him, and he was still holding her as if she were too precious to let go. "Are we home?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Almost," Theston replied, his fingers tracing a soft line along her arm. The touch was barely perceptible, but it awakened every nerve in Emeline's body. She straightened slowly, but didn't pull away completely. They remained there, too close for propriety, not close enough for what they both secretly wanted. "Theston," Emeline began, and there was something different in her voice. "When we get home, yes?" His eyes dropped to her lips. "Can we talk about us?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications. Theston nodded slowly, one of his hands finding hers again. "We can talk about whatever you wish," he said, "and about what I need to tell you." The rest of the trip passed in tense silence, charged with anticipation. Both knew that once they returned to Vale Manor, they would have to face what was growing between them, and neither was sure if they were ready for the consequences of finally naming the feeling that turned every touch into a promise, every glance into a silent confession. Love. Unfortunately, that very afternoon upon their arrival, Theston received a message summoning him urgently to one of the mines. He would have to be away for a few days. With a heavy heart, he bid his wife a tender farewell, promising they would have that conversation as soon as he returned. A few days later, young Mary Hartwell arrived at Vale Manor on an August morning, when the dew still pearled on the rose petals, and the golden sun promised a warm day ahead. She was a 15-year-old girl with intelligent brown eyes and hands calloused by hard work, wearing the dignified expression of someone who had learned early to survive with honor, despite harsh circumstances. Emeline welcomed her on the mansion's portico, dressed in a simple light blue muslin gown that made her seem more approachable, less unattainable than the high society ladies Mary had only ever seen from afar. "Welcome, Mary," she said warmly, extending both hands to the girl. "This is your new home for as long as you wish to stay." Mary lowered her gaze, shy. "Milady is too kind, but my father—" "Your father made mistakes for which he is paying himself," Emeline interrupted gently, taking the girl's rough hands between her own. "You are not responsible for his choices. Here you will be judged only by your own actions." Theston, who had returned at dawn after several days at the mines, watched the scene from the other side of the portico, leaning against a column with his arms crossed. His eyes never left Emeline. There was something about her that captivated him entirely. She was kindness in motion, compassion personified, and he was utterly lost in her. Mrs. Beatrice took Mary under her wing, leading her inside with promises of a hot bath, clean clothes, and a proper meal. When they were finally alone on the portico, Emeline turned and found Theston watching her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "What?" she asked, feeling warmth rush to her cheeks under his gaze. "You," he said simply, stepping toward her with slow, deliberate movements. "You make everything seem so natural, that kindness. It isn't an act. It's real." Emeline's heartbeat quickened as he came closer. He was so near now that she could see the fine details of his face, the faint lines around his eyes when he smiled, the sun-bronzed texture of his skin, the slight curve of his lips even when he tried to keep a serious expression around her. "Theston," she began, but her voice faltered when he raised his hand and gently brushed away a strand of hair. The wind had blown across her face. His fingers lingered against her skin, tracing the line of her jaw with a reverence that made her shiver. "You said you wanted to talk," he murmured, his voice rough. "About us." "Yes," Emeline answered, barely able to breathe properly. "Well, I'm here now, so come with me." Theston led her not to the formal drawing room or the library, but to his private chambers, a territory she had not yet entered. A delicious nervousness spread through her as he opened the door. The room was masculine but not austere. A large mahogany bed dominated the space, covered in dark blue linen. A desk piled with papers and books, a leather armchair by the fireplace, and broad windows overlooking the gardens she loved so much. "It isn't proper for us to be alone here," Emeline said, but she didn't move toward the door. "You're my wife, remember?" Theston replied, closing the door softly behind him. "And there are things I need to tell you, things I can't say with servants hovering about." He guided her to the armchair by the window, but instead of sitting separately, he knelt before her so their eyes were level. The posture was unexpectedly vulnerable for a man of his position. "Emeline," he began, taking her hands in his, holding them firmly. "When I proposed this arranged marriage, I had very clear expectations. I sought respectful companionship, a lady to manage my household, perhaps eventually heirs." She watched him silently, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "But you," he continued, and there was something almost desperate in his voice. "You changed everything. I don't even know when it happened. Maybe when I read your first letter and saw your honesty. Maybe when I saw you in that church, so beautiful and so brave. Maybe when you forgave the man who took your parents from you." One of his hands slipped free and rose to touch her face, his thumb caressing her cheek with a tenderness that stole her breath. "I think I fell in love with you a little more each day," he confessed. "Every breakfast on the terrace, every conversation about books in the library, every time I saw you smiling at the roses in the garden." Tears began to stream down Emeline's cheeks, not of sorrow, but from an emotion so intense it barely fit inside her chest. "Theston, let me finish," he said softly, now cupping her face with both hands as if she were infinitely precious. "I know you didn't choose me. I know this marriage was forced upon you out of necessity. And if all you can offer me is respect and companionship, I'll accept it. But I need you to know that I fell in love with you, Emeline, completely. In truth, I love you desperately." The silence that followed was charged with electricity. Then Emeline did something that completely surprised him. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss started gentle, exploratory, but quickly deepened into something more urgent. Theston's hand slid to her waist, drawing her closer, while she threaded her fingers through his hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I love you too," Emeline whispered against his lips. "I don't know when it happened for me either. Maybe when I received your first letter and realized you were as vulnerable as I was. Maybe when I saw you at the altar as nervous as a child. Or when you showed me your mother's gardens with such tenderness." Theston lifted her from the chair onto his knees, and she went without resistance, nestling against his chest as he wrapped his arms around her completely. "I thought I'd never feel this way," he murmured into her hair. "I thought I was destined to live alone forever, surrounded by riches but empty inside." "And now?" Emeline asked, lifting her face to look at him. "Now," he said, his gray-blue eyes burning with an intensity that made her tremble. "Now I feel like I've finally found my home. And it isn't a place, it's you." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring every moment. Theston's hands explored her back with reverence, never crossing the line of propriety. but making clear the desire burning beneath the surface. "Theston," Emeline whispered as he began to kiss her jawline, trailing slowly down her neck. "What does this mean for us?" He paused, lifting his eyes to meet hers. "It means you no longer have to sleep in the East Wing, unless you want to. It means we can truly be husband and wife, not just in name." But he stopped, and she saw the inner struggle in his eyes. "Only when you're ready, no rush, no pressure." Emeline felt something inside her melt completely. This powerful man who could have simply taken what was his by marital right was offering her a choice, offering her time. "If I told you," she began, feeling the blush rise up her neck, "that maybe I'm almost ready." Theston's eyes widened. "Emeline, not tonight," she rushed to clarify, but she didn't look away. "I still need a little more time, but soon. Very soon." Theston closed his eyes, drawing a deep breath as if to keep control. When he opened them again, there was a promise there that made Emeline's stomach flutter deliciously. "I'll wait as long as it takes," he said. "But when that moment comes..." He stopped, his lips curving into a sensual smile she had never seen before. "I'll spend the entire night showing you just how much I love you." Emeline's blush deepened, but she didn't look away. "Promise?" "I promise." They stayed like that for a long time, intertwined in the armchair as the sun moved across the sky and painted the gardens gold. They talked about everything and nothing, dreams, fears, hopes for the future. Theston spoke of his desire to expand education in the region, to create opportunities for poor children. Emeline shared her dream of opening a school at Vale Manor, where she could teach not only reading and writing, but also music and art. "I see that even our dreams are aligned, my dear. We can do this together," Theston promised, kissing her forehead. "We'll build something greater than ourselves." By the time they left the room, afternoon shadows were stretching over Vale Manor. Mrs. Beatrice, who certainly knew exactly where they had been, made no comment. She only smiled with maternal approval. Mary dined with them that evening, still shy but visibly more at ease. And when Emeline looked around the table, at Theston watching her with barely concealed adoration, at Mary who finally had a home, at Mrs. Beatrice who treated everyone like family, something expanded in her chest. Gratitude, joy, and a deep certainty that her life, which had begun in tragedy and resignation, had finally found its true purpose. That night, as they said goodnight in the hallway between their rooms, Theston pulled her in for one last kiss, more urgent, more promising. "Soon," he whispered against her lips. "Soon," Emeline agreed, and the promise lingered between them like a sacred vow. 2 months later, Vale Manor had transformed from a silent mansion into a home brimming with life and purpose. The school that had begun as a timid dream had blossomed into a tangible reality, an elegant building perched on a hill near the main house, with large windows that welcomed the morning's golden light and whitewashed walls reflecting the purity of their intentions. Emeline walked among the rows of mahogany desks, watching Mary, now 16 and blossoming under care and education, patiently guide younger students through their first words. The young girl's transformation was a powerful testament to the strength of second chances. "Very good, Tommy," Mary said patiently to an 8-year-old boy struggling to sound out the letters. "Let's try again. A good boy studies with joy." 40 children, from ages 5 to 14, both poor and wealthy, filled the desks. The revolutionary project spearheaded by Theston and Emeline had attracted both admirers and conservative critics who distrusted the mixing of social classes in one classroom. But the results spoke for themselves. Strong arms slid around Emeline's waist from behind, and a smile bloomed on her lips before she even recognized the touch. Theston rested his chin on her shoulder, watching the scene with her. "They're making good progress," he murmured against her ear, sending a delicious shiver through her. "They are," Emeline agreed, leaning slightly back into his solid chest. "Mary's a natural teacher. She has patience I sometimes lack." "You have other qualities," Theston said, and there was something dangerous in his tone that made her stomach tighten. "Qualities I appreciate immensely." Over the 2 months since their mutual confessions of love, their intimacy had grown gradually, sweetly, but also Frustratingly, Theston often had to travel to the mines, safety concerns, negotiations with buyers, inspections that only he could conduct. He spent weeks away, returning only for a few days before new urgent matters called him back. Emeline understood the necessity. The mines funded everything: the school, their home, the livelihoods of dozens of families. But understanding didn't make the longing any less acute. Each return felt like discovering him all over again. He would arrive covered in road dust, exhausted, but his eyes would light up the moment he saw her. Then they'd spend precious days together, strolling through the gardens, dining by candlelight, talking late into the night. Emeline still slept in the East Wing, partly for propriety, partly because his frequent absences made their union a slow, careful dance. Theston never wanted to rush her. Every return was a chance to win her a little more, to make her comfortable in his presence, to build solid foundations before crossing that final line. But the tension grew with each goodbye, with each reunion. That particular morning at the school, Theston had just returned from 2 weeks at the mines. He had arrived at dawn but couldn't wait until evening to see her. He went straight to the school where Emeline taught. She felt his presence before she saw him, that familiar tingling at the back of her neck that always announced his nearness. She turned, and there he was, leaning against the doorframe, watching her with that intensity that made her tremble. He was still in his travel clothes, hair tousled, a shadow of a beard on his chin. He looked tired, but his eyes burned. "I missed you," those eyes said. Every minute away was torture. Emeline didn't think. She simply went to him, and Theston wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if he feared she might vanish. "You're back early," she whispered against his chest. "I couldn't stay away another day," he admitted, breathing in her scent. 2 months like this, barely seeing you. It's killing me, Emeline." He pulled her gently to the side, out of the children's view, his arms wrapping around her waist from behind. His touch was possessive, needy, respectful, all at once. "The children are watching," Emeline whispered, though she didn't move away. Feeling his solid body pressed against her back after 2 weeks was both comforting and dangerously intoxicating. "Let them watch," Theston replied, his voice rough with restrained emotion. He leaned in, his lips finding that sensitive spot just below her ear. "Let them see how a husband should treat his wife." Emeline's knees went weak. "Theston," Mary glanced up and smiled knowingly, quickly redirecting the children's attention to their lessons. She had learned to recognize when Lord and Lady Vale needed a moment, and to create the necessary distractions. That afternoon, after classes ended, Theston surprised Emeline with an unexpected invitation. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. "I want to show you something." She laced her fingers with his, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing, and followed him through the gardens, past the rose bushes that now bloomed more vibrantly under their shared care. He led her not into the house, but to the stables where 2 horses were already saddled. "Theston, I know you can ride," he interrupted with a smile that completely disarmed her. "Your uncle told me, said you were quite the daring child." Emeline laughed, feeling a lightness she rarely experienced. "That was a long time ago. Then it's time to remember." They rode along the trails that wound through Theston's lands, climbing wooded hills until they reached a lookout point that offered a panoramic view of the entire valley. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that stole their breath away. "This is where I come when I need to think," Theston said, dismounting and helping her down with firm hands at her waist. "When the mines feel suffocating or when business grows too heavy." "It's magnificent," Emeline whispered, gazing at the vast expanse of the valley stretched before them. Theston stood behind her, arms wrapped around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. They remained like that for a long time, simply breathing together, feeling the quiet solidity of each other's presence. "Emeline," he said at last, and there was something different in his voice. "How long have we been married?" 3 months, she replied, her heart quickening. "And how long ago did you say you needed a little more time?" 2 months. She felt more than saw his smile against her neck. "And do you still need more time?" Emeline turned in his arms to face him fully. The setting sun lit his face, highlighting the intensity in his blue-gray eyes. There was desire there, ardent and undeniable. But there was also patience, respect, and a love so profound it left her speechless. "No," she whispered. "I don't think I do anymore." The change in Theston was instantaneous. His eyes widened, then narrowed with a hunger that made her knees weaken. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hands tightening at her waist. "Because once we cross that line, there's no going back. And He stopped, visibly fighting for control. "I want you so much that sometimes I can hardly breathe around you." A blush climbed up Emeline's neck, but she didn't look away. "I want you too. Every day it's harder to pull away when we kiss. Every night I dream of—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Theston pulled her into a kiss that was unlike any they had shared before. More urgent, more promising, charged with intentions that were finally ready to be fulfilled. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "May I visit you tonight?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "Tonight," Emeline agreed, and the promise hovered between them like a sacred vow. Dinner at Vale Manor that night was sweet torture. Mary, Mrs. Beatrice, and Thomas Garrett, the estate manager, dined with them as usual, but Emeline could barely focus on the food or conversation. Every time her eyes met Theston's across the table, a wave of heat coursed through her, and by the way he looked at her, with that burning intensity that promised things that made her blush, she knew he felt the same. "Milady, are you all right?" Mrs. Beatrice asked with maternal concern. "You're quite flushed." "I'm perfectly fine," Emeline said quickly, carefully avoiding Theston's gaze. "Just a bit tired from the day." "Perhaps you should retire early," Theston suggested, his tone carrying a note only she could hear. "Yes," Emeline agreed, rising from the table on slightly trembling legs. "I think I will. If you'll excuse me." Mary watched their exchange with a knowing smile but said nothing. Emeline waited in her room, wearing only the white muslin robe Theston had sent as a gift weeks earlier. She had dismissed the maid who helped her dress, preferring privacy. Her heart beat so loudly she was sure it echoed down the corridors. The soft knock on the door made her jump. "Come in," she said, her voice more fragile than she intended. Theston entered, closing the door gently behind him. He wore only trousers and a white linen shirt with the top buttons undone, revealing the bronzed skin of his chest. His hair was slightly tousled, as though he had run his hands through it repeatedly. They looked at each other for long moments, the tension between them so thick it could be touched. "Are you still sure?" Theston asked, though he didn't move from the door. "Come here and find out, my lord." Emeline replied, her voice low and seductive, surprising even herself with its boldness. The smile that spread across his face was both tender and predatory. He approached slowly, deliberately, as if savoring every step. When he finally stood before her, he raised one hand and gently untied the ribbon of her robe, letting it slip off her shoulders and pool in a soft puddle of muslin at her feet. Emeline wore only her thin nightgown, and the way Theston looked at her, with reverence and desire intertwined, made her feel both vulnerable and powerful at once. "And what do you want, Emeline?" he asked, his blood burning through his veins. "I want you, my husband. Want you now." A deep, masculine satisfaction filled his chest, desire coursing through every fiber of his being. He couldn't take his eyes off his beloved wife standing before him, finally ready. "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he murmured, his hands finding her waist and drawing her close. "Show me," she whispered against his lips. "Show me how you love me." Theston kissed her with a passion and tenderness that took her breath away. And there, under the soft light of candles and the moonlight streaming through the windows, Theston kept his promise. He spent the entire night showing her, with every reverent touch, every heated kiss, every whispered word, how deeply he loved her. Emeline regretted only one thing, that she had waited so long, and she discovered in Theston's arms that true love was not just a feeling. It was surrender. It was trust. It was finding in another not just pleasure but completeness. When they finally fell asleep intertwined, both knew they had crossed more than a physical line. They had become truly one, in body, soul, and heart. The autumn of 1775 brought to Vale Manor not only the first golden leaves on the oaks, but a fullness Emeline had never imagined possible. Mornings now began differently, waking in Theston's arms, their bodies intertwined beneath linen sheets, sharing drowsy kisses before the day's duties separated them. Intimacy had transformed everything between them. They were no longer strangers learning to coexist, but true lovers discovering each other anew every day. That particular morning, Emeline awoke to Theston's lips tracing a lazy path down her neck. "Good morning, Lady Vale," he murmured against her skin, making her shiver deliciously. "Good morning, Lord Vale," she replied, turning to face him. The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated his face, highlighting the smile lines around his eyes, lines that appeared more and more frequently these days. Emeline gently traced them with her fingers, marveling at how the stern man had transformed into a loving husband. "Do you know what I realized?" Theston said, catching her hand and kissing each finger one by one. "What?" "That I am completely hopelessly in love with my wife." Emeline laughed, a melodic sound that filled the room. "That's hardly news, my love. You tell me that every morning. And I'll keep saying it every day of my life," he promised, sealing the declaration with a deep kiss that threatened to keep them in bed all morning. The urgent knock at the door pulled them apart. "My lord," Thomas Garrett's voice carried tension, "forgive the intrusion, but there's an urgent matter requiring your immediate attention." Theston sighed, kissing Emeline's forehead before rising. "Duty calls," he said regretfully. "But tonight," Emeline agreed, watching him dress with barely concealed admiration. Even after months of intimacy, the sight of him still made her blush. The urgent matter turned out to be a sealed letter delivered by a messenger from Albany. Theston read it in the library with Emeline at his side, and she watched his expression darken progressively. "What happened?" she asked, touching his arm. "Dr. Tobias Aldridge has been released," Theston said, his voice laced with controlled fury. "Lack of sufficient evidence." His lawyers overturned the conviction. The name echoed through the library like distant thunder. Emeline felt her blood run cold. That man, the mastermind behind her parents' death, the architect of so many tragedies, was free again. "How is that possible?" she whispered. "Money, influence, corruption," Theston growled, crushing the letter in his fist. "The same weapons he's always used." Emeline stepped closer, placing her hands against his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palms. "What will we do?" Theston covered her hands with his blue-gray eyes blazing with determination. "We'll stop him. For good this time." "How?" "There are rumors he's already setting up new schemes. Small landowners in Kinderhook are being threatened with forged documents." He paused, watching her intently. "Emeline, this means facing the ghosts of the past. Sebastian will need to testify against him. We'll need to gather evidence, organize the victims." "Then that's what we'll do," she interrupted firmly. "Together." The admiration in his eyes warmed her to the core. "You're extraordinary. I'm not. I just won't let him destroy more families the way he destroyed mine." Theston pulled her into a tight embrace, and Emeline melted against his chest, breathing in his familiar, comforting scent. There, in his arms, she felt capable of facing anything. That afternoon, Mary burst into the library where Emeline was sorting books for the coming week's lessons. "Milady, milady." The girl was breathless, her eyes wide with alarm. "A man came to the school, said he had business with Lord Vale, but there was something threatening about him." A chill ran down Emeline's spine. "What kind of man?" "Well-dressed, gentlemanly on the outside, but his eyes..." Mary shuddered. They were cold, calculating. Theston appeared in the doorway, having overheard. "Describe him more, Mary." Tall, graying hair, cane with a silver head. Spoke with a refined accent, but there was cruelty in his smile. Theston's jaw tightened. "Dr. Tobias Aldridge. He was here." Emeline felt fury boiling in her veins. "On our property?" "Apparently, he wants us to know he's back," Theston said, his voice dangerously calm. "It's intimidation. And worse, it's a threat." Emeline stepped toward him, her eyes blazing with that fierce determination he both admired and feared. "Then we'll show him we're not easily intimidated." "Emeline." Theston gripped her shoulders firmly, forcing her to look at him. "This man isn't just a criminal. He's dangerous. The fact that he came here, near the school where you were, is a calculated provocation. He's not afraid of us, and that worries me deeply." "No," she interrupted, lifting her chin with that familiar stubbornness. My parents died fighting men like him. I won't dishonor their memory by cowering now. Theston looked at his wife, so delicate in appearance yet fierce as a lioness when it mattered, and felt a mix of love and fear swell inside him. He admired her strength, but the thought of losing her terrified him. Your courage inspires me, but it also terrifies me, he said hoarsely, brushing his hand along her cheek. You're everything to me, Emeline, everything, and the thought of that man hurting you. He broke off, struggling with his emotions. I promise I'll do everything in my power to put him back behind bars. But I need your word that you won't put yourself in unnecessary danger, that you'll let me protect you. Theston, please, he interrupted, his eyes pleading. Let me handle this. I'll gather the evidence, rally the witnesses, face Aldridge in court. But you must stay safe. I need to know you're safe. Emeline saw the genuine fear in his eyes, not fear for himself, but for her. She understood this wasn't about control, but love manifesting as protection. All right, she said softly, covering his hand with hers. I'll be careful. But don't ask me to stay completely out of it. I can help in ways that won't put me in direct danger. Theston nodded slowly, though tension still marked his features. We need to be smart about this, strategic. How? First, I'll visit Sebastian alone. I need to understand exactly what Aldridge is planning. Second, Thomas can quietly organize the farmers in Kinderhook. They trust him. Third, he paused as a plan took shape in his mind. Third, we'll use Aldridge's arrogance against him. Men like him always make mistakes when they feel invincible. And me? Emeline asked. How can I help without putting myself at risk? Theston pulled her into a tight embrace. You can keep Vale Manor running. The school, the children, Mary, all of it must continue. It's our normal life he wants to destroy. We won't let him. Emeline pressed against his chest, listening to his racing heartbeat. I'm afraid, Theston, not of Aldridge, but of losing what we've built. You won't lose it, he promised, kissing the top of her head. I'll make sure of it, even if I have to face him alone. That night after dinner, Theston and Emeline withdrew to their rooms. The tension of the day hung over them, but so did something else, a need to reconnect, to remember what they were fighting to protect. Theston pulled her into his arms as soon as the door closed, kissing her with an urgency that spoke of near loss and a love too deep for words. Promise me something, he whispered against her lips. Anything. That you won't put yourself in unnecessary danger. That you'll let me protect you. Emeline pulled back slightly to meet his eyes. Only if you promise the same. We're partners, Theston. In everything. Including this. He closed his eyes, resting his forehead against hers. You terrify me sometimes. That courage of yours. And you inspire me, she replied. Every day. They made love that night with a different kind of intensity. Not just desire, but a declaration of life. A celebration of what they'd built together, and a fierce determination to protect it at all costs. And as they fell asleep intertwined, neither of them could have imagined that the coming battle would test not only their courage, but the very foundation of everything they had built. Dr. Tobias Aldridge had made a grave mistake in underestimating them, and they were about to show him just how costly that mistake would be. The journey to Albany unfolded under a tense silence. Theston rode alone, as he had promised Emeline, but carried with him something precious, a letter from her to Sebastian, expressing gratitude for his forthcoming cooperation and offering words of encouragement to the repentant man. The prison looked even gloomier under the overcast October sky. The jailer led him through damp corridors to the cell where Sebastian waited, noticeably thinner than on Theston's last visit. Lord Vale, Sebastian greeted, rising with some effort. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Dr. Tobias Aldridge has been released, Theston said bluntly. And he's already scheming again. Color drained from Sebastian's face. My God, I knew this would happen. A man like him always finds a way. That's why I'm here. I need everything you know about his methods. Names of accomplices, locations of hidden documents, the patterns he uses. Everything. Sebastian nodded slowly, then asked hesitantly, And Lady Emeline? How is my Mary? Theston pulled the letter from the inner pocket of his coat. Emeline sent this to you, and Mary is thriving. She's a teacher at the school now, admired by everyone. Sebastian's hands trembled as he received the letter. He read it silently, and tears began streaming down his weathered cheeks. She's pure kindness. Just like your wife. She is, Theston agreed. And that's exactly why I won't allow Aldridge to threaten them. Sebastian wiped his eyes and began to speak. For hours he revealed intricate details of Aldridge's criminal network. Names of corrupt notaries who forged documents, land registry clerks who accepted bribes, the complex system of intimidation Aldridge used to silence victims. He has a secret safe, Sebastian finally said, in the basement of his office in Kinderhook. He keeps copies of all the forged documents there. It's his insurance policy in case any accomplice tries to betray him. How do you access the safe? Combination, but I know it. I watched him open it several times and memorized it. Sebastian recited the numbers he had stored years earlier. But Lord Vale, you need to understand. Aldridge doesn't work alone anymore. He's hired thugs, violent men. If they find out you're investigating, I'll be careful, Theston promised. But I need those documents. By the time he returned to Vale Manor, night had fallen. Emeline waited on the porch wrapped in a wool shawl, relief flooding her face as she saw him dismount. I was worried, she said, running into his arms. Theston held her tightly, breathing in the lavender scent that always clung to her. Forgive me for making you wait. Did you get what you needed? Yes, and more. He led her inside to the privacy of his study and shared everything Sebastian had revealed. Emeline listened intently, her sharp mind processing every detail. The safe, she said. It's the key to everything. It is. But getting to it will be dangerous. You're not going alone. It wasn't a question. Emeline, we promised I'd be careful. Not that I'd stay completely out of it. She gripped his hands firmly. Theston, listen to me. Aldridge has men watching. An English lord snooping around Kinderhook alone will immediately raise suspicion. But a married couple visiting neighboring farms, talking with landowners about schooling for their children. She let the suggestion hang. Theston studied her, seeing the sharp intelligence behind those gentle eyes. It's risky. Less risky than you going alone and getting caught? He sighed, recognizing the logic in her argument. You're stubborn, and you love me for it. I do, he admitted, pulling her into a kiss. But if anything goes wrong, you run. Promise me, only if you promise the same. They sealed the agreement with another kiss, deeper this time, charged with the tension of looming danger and the love that made them braver than they should be. 2 days later, they set out for Kinderhook disguised as a couple traveling through the region. Emeline wore a simple traveling dress, while Theston avoided his usual formal attire. They spent the day speaking with small farmers, and the picture that emerged was deeply troubling. 6 families had already received eviction notices based on claims of debts that didn't exist, all signed by the same corrupt notaries Sebastian had mentioned. It's the same pattern, Emeline whispered as they rode. Exactly what he's done before. At nightfall, they settled in a modest inn overlooking Aldridge's office, a 2-story building on the main street. He leaves every night at 9, Theston explained. Goes to the gentleman's club. We'll have 2 hours. Emeline nodded, her heart pounding. Then let's do it. They approached through the side alley. Theston picked the back door lock with surprising skill. A trick he'd learned in his mining years, he whispered. The office smelled of expensive cigars and brandy. They descended the stairs into the basement, where a cast-iron safe stood against the wall. Theston spun the dial to the numbers Sebastian had given him. The mechanism clicked smoothly. Inside, they found exactly what they'd hoped for. Dozens of forged documents, bribe receipts, incriminating correspondence. It was enough evidence to condemn Aldridge and all his accomplices. Take everything, Emeline whispered, holding an open satchel. That's when they heard it. Footsteps upstairs. Aldridge had returned early. Theston's eyes locked with Emeline's, and she saw raw fear in his. The window, he whispered, pointing to a narrow opening near the ceiling. But it was too small for them both to escape quickly. You first, he ordered. Not without you. Emeline, please. The basement door creaked open. Lantern light spilled down the stairs. Well, well, Aldridge's voice was oily and dangerous. Lord Vale, what a surprise. Or perhaps not. Theston shoved Emeline behind him, shielding her with his body. Dr. Aldridge, and you've brought company. The lovely Lady Vale, I presume. Aldridge descended fully, revealing 2 burly men behind him. You know, I expected you'd try something like this. That's why I came back early, to give you a proper welcome. Theston quickly calculated their odds. 2 armed thugs, Aldridge blocking the stairs. The window was their only hope. Emeline, he whispered, when I say so, you run to the window. I won't leave you. Now! Theston shoved a heavy bookshelf toward the thugs and practically hurled Emeline toward the window. She scrambled desperately, hearing the sounds of a struggle behind her. When she looked back, she saw Theston being overpowered by the 2 men. Run! He shouted. Get help! With tears streaming down her face, Emeline forced herself to obey. She slipped through the narrow window and sprinted through the dark streets of Kinderhook toward the sheriff's office. But as she ran, one burning certainty filled her chest. If anything happened to Theston, she would bring Aldridge down herself, no matter the cost. Emeline burst into the Kinderhook sheriff's office with her dress torn and breath ragged, startling the officer dozing behind his desk. Sheriff Burton, I need help immediately. The man sprang to his feet, hand instinctively going to the gun at his hip. Lady Vale, what's happened? Dr. Tobias Aldridge has captured my husband. In the basement of his office, he has armed men with him. The sheriff paled. Aldridge? But he's a respectable citizen. He's a criminal. Emeline slammed her palms on the desk with a force that surprised even herself. And at this very moment, he's holding Lord Theston Vale prisoner. If you don't act now, you'll have the blood of an English nobleman on your hands. Imagine how the crown will react to that. The mention of the British crown had the intended effect. Burton called his 2 deputies and, reluctantly, followed Emeline through the dark streets back to Aldridge's office. In the basement, Theston was tied to a chair, his lip bleeding where one of the thugs had struck him. Aldridge paced around him like a predator studying a trapped prey. You know, Lord Vale, I admire your courage, Aldridge said, lighting an expensive cigar. Stupid, but courage nonetheless. Did you really think you could defeat me? I already have, Theston replied, spitting blood. My wife escaped. By now she will have alerted the authorities. Aldridge laughed. The authorities in Kinderhook are, shall we say, sympathetic to my interests. Sheriff Burton isn't going to... The basement door crashed open. Dr. Aldridge, Sheriff Burton's voice echoed down the stairs. In the name of the law, release Lord Vale immediately. Aldridge's expression twisted into a mask of shock and fury. Emeline appeared behind the sheriff, and the relief that washed over Theston's face was plain to see. Sheriff, what a surprise, Aldridge said, quickly regaining composure. I fear there's been a misunderstanding. Lord Vale broke into my property and is attempting to plant false evidence against me. Lies. Emeline descended the stairs, pointing at the open safe. There are the proofs of your crimes, forged documents, bribe receipts, everything needed to convict you. Burton approached the safe and pulled out a few papers. As he read, his expression shifted, from skepticism to growing horror. My God, he whispered. This is deed forgery, bribery of notaries. Forgery? Aldridge protested. Planted by them to incriminate me. Forgery? Emeline lifted one of the documents the sheriff held. Sheriff, examine the signature. It's Dr. Aldridge's own handwriting. And look here, this payment receipt is dated 3 weeks ago with the seal of the Kinderhook Colonial Bank. Freshly fabricated papers wouldn't have aged ink or authentic bank seals. Burton peered closer, rubbing the paper between his fingers. She's right. This paper is months old, not days. Furthermore, Emeline continued, her voice gathering strength, the sheriff will recall Dr. Aldridge was released from prison only 6 weeks ago, convicted for this exact crime, forging property titles. These documents prove he resumed his criminal activities immediately upon release. Aldridge visibly blanched. That proves nothing. It proves a pattern, Theston said, spitting blood yet keeping his voice steady. The same methods, the same victims in Kinderhook Sebastian Hartwell identified in his original testimony. All documented here, in your own hand. Burton looked from Aldridge to the papers, then to his deputies. "Release Lord Vale," he ordered the men with him, "and place Dr. Aldridge and these thugs under arrest." "This is absurd." Aldridge stepped back. "Sheriff Burton, remember our previous conversations." The veiled threat hardened Burton's face. "Are you attempting to bribe a law officer in front of witnesses, Doctor? That only worsens your situation." While the deputies cuffed the thugs, Emeline ran to Theston. Her hands trembled as she untied the ropes binding him. "You're hurt," she whispered, touching his split lip gently. "I'll live," he answered, pulling her into a fierce embrace as soon as he was free. "You were incredibly brave and stubborn. I told you to run. I ran to get help as you ordered." She drew back slightly to look at him. "Did you really think I would abandon you?" The admiration in his eyes warmed her through. "No, but I hoped you'd choose safety." "My safety is wherever you are." Theston kissed her. "And besides loyal and brave, you were very persuasive, love." "I learned from the best," she murmured against his chest. Burton approached with a bag full of documents from the safe. "I'll need both of you to give formal statements tomorrow. But Lord Vale, Lady Vale, in the name of the law, thank you for bringing this to light." Aldridge, being shackled, shot them a look of pure hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "It is," Emeline replied with a calm that surprised even herself. "This time you'll stay where you belong." 2 weeks later, the Albany courthouse was packed for Dr. Tobias Aldridge's trial. This time, the evidence was irrefutable. The documents from the safe, combined with Sebastian Hartwell's detailed testimony and the statements of dozens of victims organized by Thomas Garrett, built a case impossible to refute. Emeline and Theston sat in the front row, hands entwined. She wore a pale silk dress. He was dressed with a lord's elegance, both intent that Aldridge see exactly who had defeated him. Sebastian was brought to the stand, visibly nervous but resolute. When his eyes found Mary's, seated beside Emeline, something in him steadied. "Please state your name for the court," the prosecutor said. "Sebastian Hartwell, 52, widower." He paused, looking directly at the jury. "Father of Mary Hartwell, and a convicted criminal serving time for crimes I committed under orders from the defendant." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor nodded. "Mr. Hartwell, are you here today of your own free will?" "I am, sir. I came to testify against Dr. Tobias Aldridge, not to reduce my sentence, but because it is the only way to repair, even in part, the harm I caused by following his orders. And you understand that by testifying today, you may further incriminate yourself." Sebastian lifted his chin. "I do. But the truth must be told. Innocent families are suffering now as they did in the past. If my testimony can stop him, then let everything be said." For hours, Sebastian laid out every facet of the criminal scheme. Unlike his earlier hesitant testimony, he now spoke with devastating clarity and precision. How Aldridge orchestrated everything, how they intimidated victims, how they bribed officials. Then came the crucial moment. "Mr. Hartwell," the prosecutor said, "can you tell us about John and Elizabeth Winrose?" Sebastian closed his eyes briefly, then opened them to fix on Emeline. "Dr. Aldridge learned that the Winroses had uncovered our scheme. He ordered me to deal with the problem. When I hesitated, he threatened my daughter, said that if I didn't obey, Mary would suffer the consequences." Emeline squeezed Theston's hand hard. "And what did you do?" "I got their coachman drunk. I knew the mountain roads were dangerous. I knew that—" His voice faltered. "I knew they would likely die. And they did. Because of my cowardice and Aldridge's cruelty." "Lies!" Aldridge shot to his feet. "This man is inventing stories to reduce his own sentence." "Silence!" The judge banged the gavel. "Mr. Aldridge, sit down." The prosecutor stepped closer to Sebastian. "Do you have proof of these allegations?" "I do." Sebastian pulled a yellowed letter from his pocket. "A letter from Dr. Aldridge instructing me to eliminate the Winrose problem. I kept it all these years as Insurance. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Theston felt Emeline tremble beside him and pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her. When the safe's documents were presented one by one, Aldridge's defense collapsed completely. There was no arguing against such overwhelming evidence. The judge deliberated for only 30 minutes. Dr. Tobias Aldridge, the judge announced in a solemn voice, "This court sentences you to 25 years in prison for the crimes of document forgery, fraud, criminal conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and conspiracy to commit murder. Additionally, all of your assets will be seized to compensate the victims of your crimes." When Aldridge was let out in chains, he passed by Emeline and Theston. His look of pure hatred made them shiver, but they did not avert their eyes. They had won. Outside the courthouse, Mary ran into her father's arms. Sebastian held her tightly, sobbing, "Forgive me, my daughter, for everything." "I forgave you long ago, Papa," Mary whispered. Emeline and Theston watched the scene, their fingers intertwined. For his decisive cooperation and genuine repentance, Sebastian's sentence would be reduced to 3 more years, with the possibility of parole in 2. "Sebastian," Emeline called. When he looked at her, she continued, "When you're released, there will be a place for you at Vale Manor if you wish. You could work at the school, help with the children, teach carpentry perhaps." The man stared at her in disbelief. "Lady Vale, I don't deserve. None of us deserves the grace we receive," she gently interrupted. "But it's offered to us all the same, and I choose to offer it to you." Sebastian fell to his knees right there on the courthouse steps, weeping with gratitude. Emeline burst into the Kinderhook Sheriff's office with her dress torn and breath ragged, startling the officer dozing behind his desk. "Sheriff Burton, I need help immediately." The man sprang to his feet, hand instinctively going to the gun at his hip. "Lady Vale, what's happened?" "Dr. Tobias Aldridge has captured my husband. In the basement of his office, he has armed men with him." The sheriff paled. "Aldridge? But he's a respectable citizen." "He's a criminal." Emeline slammed her palms on the desk with a force that surprised even herself. "And at this very moment he's holding Lord Theston Vale prisoner. If you don't act now, you'll have the blood of an English nobleman on your hands. Imagine how the Crown will react to that." The mention of the British Crown had the intended effect. Burton called his 2 deputies and, reluctantly, followed Emeline through the dark streets back to Aldridge's office. In the basement, Theston was tied to a chair, his lip bleeding where one of the thugs had struck him. Aldridge paced around him like a predator studying a trapped prey. "You know, Lord Vale, I admire your courage," Aldridge said, lighting an expensive cigar. "Stupid, but courage nonetheless. Did you really think you could defeat me?" "I already have," Theston replied, spitting blood. "My wife escaped. By now she will have alerted the authorities." Aldridge laughed. "The authorities in Kinderhook are, shall we say, sympathetic to my interests. Sheriff Burton isn't going to—" The basement door crashed open. "Dr. Aldridge," Sheriff Burton's voice echoed down the stairs. "In the name of the law, release Lord Vale immediately." Aldridge's expression twisted into a mask of shock and fury. Emeline appeared behind the sheriff, and the relief that washed over Theston's face was plain to see. "Sheriff, what a surprise," Aldridge said, quickly regaining composure. "I fear there's been a misunderstanding. Lord Vale broke into my property and is attempting to plant false evidence against me." "Lies." Emeline descended the stairs, pointing at the open safe. "There are the proofs of your crimes, forged documents, bribe receipts, everything needed to convict you." Burton approached the safe and pulled out a few papers. As he read, his expression shifted, from skepticism to growing horror. "My God," he whispered. "This is deed forgery, bribery of notaries." "Forgery?" Aldridge protested. "Planted by them to incriminate me." "Forgery?" Emeline lifted one of the documents the sheriff held. "Sheriff, examine the signature. It's Dr. Aldridge's own handwriting. And look here, this payment receipt is dated 3 weeks ago with the seal of the Kinderhook Colonial Bank. Freshly fabricated papers wouldn't have aged ink or authentic bank seals." Burton peered closer, rubbing the paper between his fingers. "She's right. This paper is months old, not days." "Furthermore," Emeline continued, her voice gathering strength, "the sheriff will recall Dr. Aldridge was released from prison only 6 weeks ago, convicted for this exact crime, forging property titles. These documents prove he resumed his criminal activities immediately upon release." Aldridge visibly blanched. "That proves nothing." "It proves a pattern," Theston said, spitting blood yet keeping his voice steady. "The same methods, the same victims in Kinderhook Sebastian Hartwell identified in his original testimony. All documented here, in your own hand." Burton looked from Aldridge to the papers, then to his deputies. "Release Lord Vale," he ordered the men with him, "and place Dr. Aldridge and these thugs under arrest." "This is absurd." Aldridge stepped back. "Sheriff Burton, remember our previous conversations." The veiled threat hardened Burton's face. "Are you attempting to bribe a law officer in front of witnesses, Doctor? That only worsens your situation." While the deputies cuffed the thugs, Emeline ran to Theston. Her hands trembled as she untied the ropes binding him. "You're hurt," she whispered, touching his split lip gently. "I'll live," he answered, pulling her into a fierce embrace as soon as he was free. "You were incredibly brave and stubborn. I told you to run. I ran to get help as you ordered." She drew back slightly to look at him. "Did you really think I would abandon you?" The admiration in his eyes warmed her through. "No, but I hoped you'd choose safety." "My safety is wherever you are." Theston kissed her. "And besides loyal and brave, you were very persuasive, love." "I learned from the best," she murmured against his chest. Burton approached with a bag full of documents from the safe. "I'll need both of you to give formal statements tomorrow. But Lord Vale, Lady Vale, in the name of the law, thank you for bringing this to light." Aldridge, being shackled, shot them a look of pure hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "It is," Emeline replied with a calm that surprised even herself. "This time you'll stay where you belong." 2 weeks later, the Albany courthouse was packed for Dr. Tobias Aldridge's trial. This time, the evidence was irrefutable. The documents from the safe, combined with Sebastian Hartwell's detailed testimony and the statements of dozens of victims organized by Thomas Garrett, built a case impossible to refute. Emeline and Theston sat in the front row, hands entwined. She wore a pale silk dress. He was dressed with a lord's elegance, both intent that Aldridge see exactly who had defeated him. Sebastian was brought to the stand, visibly nervous but resolute. When his eyes found Mary's, seated beside Emeline, something in him steadied. "Please state your name for the court," the prosecutor said. "Sebastian Hartwell, 52, widower." He paused, looking directly at the jury. "Father of Mary Hartwell, and a convicted criminal serving time for crimes I committed under orders from the defendant." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor nodded. "Mr. Hartwell, are you here today of your own free will?" "I am, sir. I came to testify against Dr. Tobias Aldridge, not to reduce my sentence, but because it is the only way to repair, even in part, the harm I caused by following his orders. And you understand that by testifying today, you may further incriminate yourself." Sebastian lifted his chin. "I do. But the truth must be told. Innocent families are suffering now as they did in the past. If my testimony can stop him, then let everything be said." For hours, Sebastian laid out every facet of the criminal scheme. Unlike his earlier hesitant testimony, he now spoke with devastating clarity and precision. How Aldridge orchestrated everything, how they intimidated victims, how they bribed officials. Then came the crucial moment. "Mr. Hartwell," the prosecutor said, "can you tell us about John and Elizabeth Winrose?" Sebastian closed his eyes briefly, then opened them to fix on Emeline. "Dr. Aldridge learned that the Winroses had uncovered our scheme. He ordered me to deal with the problem. When I hesitated, he threatened my daughter, said that if I didn't obey, Mary would suffer the consequences." Emeline squeezed Theston's hand hard. "And what did you do?" I got their coachman drunk. I knew the mountain roads were dangerous. I knew that—" His voice faltered. "I knew they would likely die. And they did, because of my cowardice and Aldridge's cruelty." "Lies!" Aldridge shot to his feet. "This man is inventing stories to reduce his own sentence." "Silence!" The judge banged the gavel. "Mr. Aldridge, sit down." The prosecutor stepped closer to Sebastian. "Do you have proof of these allegations?" "I do." Sebastian pulled a yellowed letter from his pocket. "A letter from Dr. Aldridge instructing me to eliminate the Winrose problem. I kept it all these years as insurance." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Theston felt Emeline tremble beside him and pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her. When the safe's documents were presented one by one, Aldridge's defense collapsed completely. There was no arguing against such overwhelming evidence. The judge deliberated for only 30 minutes. "Dr. Tobias Aldridge," the judge announced in a solemn voice, "this court sentences you to 25 years in prison for the crimes of document forgery, fraud, criminal conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and conspiracy to commit murder. Additionally, all of your assets will be seized to compensate the victims of your crimes." When Aldridge was let out in chains, he passed by Emeline and Theston. His look of pure hatred made them shiver, but they did not avert their eyes. They had won. Outside the courthouse, Mary ran into her father's arms. Sebastian held her tightly, sobbing, "Forgive me, my daughter, for everything." "I forgave you long ago, Papa," Mary whispered. Emeline and Theston watched the scene, their fingers intertwined. For his decisive cooperation and genuine repentance, Sebastian's sentence would be reduced to 3 more years, with the possibility of parole in 2. "Sebastian," Emeline called. When he looked at her, she continued, "When you're released, there will be a place for you at Vale Manor if you wish. You could work at the school, help with the children, teach carpentry perhaps." The man stared at her in disbelief. "Lady Vale, I don't deserve— None of us deserves the grace we receive," she gently interrupted. "But it's offered to us all the same, and I choose to offer it to you." Sebastian fell to his knees right there on the courthouse steps, weeping with gratitude. Emeline knew something was different even before she was certain. The morning sickness began subtly, a light nausea upon waking, a newfound sensitivity to smells that had never bothered her before. But it was Mrs. Beatrice, with her decades of maternal experience, who first voiced the suspicion. "Milady," the housekeeper said one November morning, watching Emeline push away her coffee with a greenish expression. "When was your last— Well, when was it?" Emeline stopped, counting the days in her head. "Then the weeks." Her eyes widened. "My God," she whispered, bringing her hand to her still flat stomach. I might be expecting a baby," Mrs. Beatrice finished with a radiant smile. "I'd bet my pension on it." Emeline wanted to be certain before telling Theston. Dr. Morrison, the family physician, confirmed 3 days later. She was approximately 8 weeks pregnant. She chose to share the news on a special evening. She had his favorite dinner prepared, wore the dress he adored, and waited for him in the dining room with her heart pounding. When he walked in, still dusty from the mines, he stopped when he saw her. "What's the special occasion?" he asked with a curious smile. "Sit," Emeline said, pointing to the chair beside hers, not the head of the table where he usually sat. Theston obeyed, intrigued. She took his hands in hers, and he noticed they were trembling slightly. "You're nervous," he observed, immediate concern flashing across his face. "What happened?" "Aldridge." "It's not about Aldridge," she interrupted quickly. "It's about us. About our family." "Our family?" Emeline guided his hands to her stomach, pressing his broad palms against the silk fabric. "Which will soon be bigger. In about 7 months." Theston stared, processing. Then understanding dawned across his face like the rising sun. We're going to have a baby," Emeline confirmed, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. "You're going to be a father, Theston." The sound that escaped him was half laugh, half sob. He pulled her from her chair into his arms, spinning her around before suddenly remembering her condition and setting her back down with exaggerated care. My God, Emeline, a baby. Our baby. He knelt before her, pressing his face against her stomach. I can't believe it. Believe it, she whispered, running her fingers through his hair. We're creating life, the fruit of our love. That night, Theston barely let her leave his arms, whispering promises to the baby growing inside her, making plans, dreaming aloud about the future. In all her most hopeful childhood dreams as an orphan, Emeline could never have imagined she would be this happy or have a husband as tender as Theston. And he made sure to show her every day. His love wasn't just words. It was expressed through gentle, providing, protective, and passionate actions. Emeline was his joy, and he was deeply grateful to God for the wife he had given him. The news spread through Vale Manor like wildfire. Mrs. Beatrice wept with joy. Mary hugged Emeline with youthful enthusiasm. Thomas Garrett congratulated Theston with hearty pats on the back. And the school children, upon hearing they'd soon meet a little lord or lady, filled the house with handmade drawings and gifts. The months that followed were ones of extraordinary fullness. Theston became an even more attentive husband, something Emeline had thought impossible. He insisted she rest more, hired an experienced midwife from Philadelphia, and had the most enchanting nursery she had ever seen built. On Sundays, they walked together to the small Episcopal church in the region, where Reverend Matthews welcomed them warmly. Emeline cherished those moments, Theston's hand holding hers during hymns, the way he whispered prayers of gratitude, the tender looks they exchanged during sermons. I thank God every day for you, Theston would murmur as they walked home under the autumn sun, for giving us to each other, and now for blessing us with this child. Emeline rested her head on his shoulder. Me too. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life. That you're mine. I'm yours, he confirmed, kissing the top of her head. I always will be. When Emeline entered her 8th month of pregnancy, Theston had to travel to the more distant mines for a few days to handle urgent safety issues. He left with visible reluctance. I don't want to leave you, he said for the 10th time as he packed his bags. It's only 4 days, Emeline reminded him, though her heart tightened at the thought. Mrs. Beatrice will be here with me, and Mary, and Dr. Morrison is only an hour away. 4 days is a long time. He pulled her into his arms, her rounded belly between them. What if the baby decides to come early? Dr. Morrison said there's still a month left. Babies don't usually arrive early that often. Stay calm, my love. Even so, Theston only agreed to leave after tripling the property's security. Extra guards were stationed, and he personally instructed each one on how to protect his Baroness. The 4 days felt long for both of them. Emeline discovered she had grown so used to his presence that his absence made the house feel strangely empty. She slept holding his pillow, breathing in its lingering scent, counting the hours until his return. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Emeline was resting on the porch when she heard the unmistakable sound of horses approaching. Her heart leapt. It was too soon for Theston, but it was him. He dismounted before the carriage had even fully stopped, running to her with an expression of relief mixed with something close to panic. Are you all right? Is the baby all right? We're perfectly fine, Emeline said, laughing and crying at the same time. But you came back a day early. I couldn't stay away, he confessed, kneeling before her and pressing his hands against her round belly. Only weeks left now. I can't risk being away when our child decides to arrive. 4 weeks, Emeline repeated, stroking his face. We still have time. Even so, my place is by your side. That night, they made love with the infinite tenderness of two people, afraid of breaking something precious. Theston touched her as if she were made of crystal. Each caress an act of worship, each kiss a promise. However, just 2 weeks later, on a rainy night, Emeline awoke with a sudden pain that doubled her over. Theston, she called, clutching his arm. Theston, wake up. He woke instantly. What is it? The baby. He's coming. What followed in the next hours was a whirlwind of activity. Mrs. Beatrice and the midwife took command. Dr. Morrison was called, and Theston, the man who had faced criminals without flinching, turned pale as a ghost. The labor lasted several hours. Theston remained by Emeline's side the entire time, ignoring the social conventions that said men should not witness childbirth. He held her hand, wiped her sweat, whispered encouragement when she screamed in pain. "You can do this, my love. You're the strongest woman I know." Finally, when the morning sun shone bright and strong through the windows after the stormy night, a strong, healthy cry filled the room. "It's a boy," the midwife announced, holding up the newborn. "A beautiful, strong boy." Emeline collapsed against the pillows, exhausted but radiant. Tears streamed freely down Theston's face as he watched the midwife clean and wrap their son. When the baby was finally placed in Emeline's arms, both parents fell into reverent silence. The boy was perfect, rosy with tufts of dark brown hair like his father's, and when he opened his eyes, they were the same blue-gray shade. "Simon," Emeline whispered. "We'll call him Simon after your father." "Simon Vale," Theston repeated, gently touching his son's tiny cheek. "Welcome to the world, my son." The baby gripped Theston's finger with surprising strength, and something inside the new father shattered completely. He sobbed, burying his face in Emeline's shoulder. I never imagined I could be this happy." "Neither did I," Emeline agreed, kissing her husband's sweaty forehead. "But here we are. A family." Simon yawned, nestling against his mother's breast with the instinctive trust of newborns. He was calm, they observed. Not excessively fussy, just quietly taking in the world around him. "He's perfect," Theston murmured. "Just like you. Just like everything we've built." In the weeks that followed, Vale Manor became a sanctuary of new joy. Theston proved to be a devoted father, waking at night to help with the baby, singing lullabies in a surprisingly melodious voice, spending hours simply watching his son sleep. "I'm completely in love," he confessed one night with Simon asleep in his arms. "With this little being, and with you even more than before, if that's possible." Emeline watched her husband and son with a heart overflowing. "It's possible. Because I feel the same." And there, in the house that had begun as a marriage of convenience, a true family flourished, built on the foundation of hard-earned love, trials overcome, and faith that even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to extraordinary endings. 10 years later, the November sun of 1786 bathed the Hudson Valley fields in that special autumn light, turning the oak leaves into glowing embers of crimson and amber. From the porch of Vale Manor, Emeline watched the scene unfolding in the gardens with a smile that never aged. No matter how many years passed, that sight still warmed her heart. Simon, now 10, ran across the lawns chasing his younger sisters with the endless patience of an older brother. 7-year-old Eleanor laughed as she hid behind the rose bushes, her brown curls escaping from their careful braids. And little Grace, only 5, held up her skirt as she tried to keep up with her siblings on her short legs. "Slow down, Simon," Emeline called. "Grace can barely keep up with you." The boy stopped immediately, always obedient, always attentive, and reached out to his youngest sister. "Come on, Gracie. I'll carry you." Emeline felt familiar arms wrap around her waist from behind, and she leaned naturally against Theston's solid chest. Even after a decade of marriage, his touch still sent waves of warmth through her body. "He's exactly like you," Emeline murmured, watching Simon lift Grace onto his shoulders with care. "No," Theston corrected, kissing her neck. "He has my looks, but your heart. Too gentle for this world sometimes, like his father." Theston laughed, that rich sound she loved to provoke. "Your memory is selective, Lady Vale. I remember being quite stern when we met, until I melted all that ice." Emeline turned in his arms to face him. At 46, Theston had a few silver strands at his temples and deeper lines around his eyes. But to her, he was more handsome than ever, especially when he smiled that way, the smile he reserved only for her and the children. "You didn't melt the ice," he said, stealing a kiss. "You simply showed me I was never made of ice." It was loneliness disguised as coldness. The sound of approaching carriages interrupted the moment. Eleanor shouted excitedly, "They're here!" Indeed, the Winrose carriage was making its way up the main drive. Colonel William and Margaret were coming to dine with them, a tradition they maintained every November, in preparation for the grand Thanksgiving dinner that gathered the entire extended family. "Your uncles arrived early," Theston observed. "Probably eager to spoil the children," Emeline replied, adjusting her hair. Or to hear Simon's latest achievements in Latin. Simon was, indeed, an academic prodigy. At 10, He read fluently in 3 languages and showed a natural aptitude for mathematics that impressed even Theston. But what made his parents proudest was his kindness, the way he protected his sisters, helped at the school with younger children, and treated everyone with genuine respect, regardless of social standing. He was a true little lord, a perfect miniature of his father, not only in looks but in character. Dinner was lively, as always, when the family gathered. Margaret couldn't stop commenting on how much the girls had grown, while the colonel discussed mining business with Theston, operations that were thriving under the newly expanded management. "I heard you opened 2 new galleries," William remarked, savoring his wine. "The profits must be considerable." "They are," Theston agreed. "But I've discovered that monetary wealth pales in comparison to other treasures." His gaze found Emeline's across the table, and she felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Even after 10 years, 3 children, and countless challenges overcome, he still looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "Papa says Mama is his greatest treasure," Eleanor declared with 7-year-old innocence. "And we're the second greatest?" The table burst into affectionate laughter, and Emeline felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Theston simply smiled, not denying it. Later, after the children were put to bed and the aunts and uncles had retired to their rooms, Emeline and Theston walked through the moonlit gardens. "You know what I realized today?" Emeline said, intertwining her fingers with his. "Tell me that we've built something extraordinary. Not just our family, but all of this." She made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the entire estate. "The school has already educated over 200 children. Mary now runs the entire institution and is training new teachers. Those families from Kinderhook we saved from Aldridge are thriving. Sebastian, after his release, became a respected master carpenter. And Dr. Tobias Aldridge remains imprisoned," Theston added with grim satisfaction. "Where he belongs. We've saved so many people, Theston. Dozens of families would have lost everything if we hadn't had the courage to stand up to him, relying on God's grace." Theston stopped, turning her toward him under the moon's silver light. "It wasn't just courage, my love. It was you. Your ability to forgive Sebastian, to see potential in Mary, to turn pain into purpose. I merely had the fortune of standing by your side. I admit it was truly grace." "Fortune?" Emeline raised her eyebrows. "You negotiated an arranged marriage. Fortune had nothing to do with it. It had everything to do with it. Fortune that your uncles told me about you. Fortune that you accepted. Fortune that against all odds 2 lonely souls found not just companionship but true love." Tears pricked Emeline's eyes. Even after all these years, he could still make her cry with simple words, heavy with deep truth. "You know what sometimes haunts me?" she whispered. "What?" "Thinking that if my parents hadn't died, if my uncles hadn't been in debt, if you hadn't needed a wife, none of this would exist. Simon, Eleanor, Grace, the school, everything we've built. It's unsettling to think our happiness was born from so much tragedy." Theston pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest. "Or perhaps it's proof that God has mysterious ways of turning the worst into something beautiful. We couldn't stop your parents' deaths, but we honored their memory by ensuring others didn't suffer the same fate. We didn't just choose to marry, we chose to love. Every day we choose it." "Every day," Emeline agreed. "And I would choose you again, always." The next morning, the family gathered for breakfast on the terrace. Simon was reading fables to his sisters, using different voices for each character. Eleanor laughed loudly while Grace clapped enthusiastically. Mary appeared with news from the school. 3 more families had requested enrollment for their children. The institution had grown so much that they were planning to build a second building in the spring. "Education is transforming the whole region," Mary commented, accepting a cup of tea from Mrs. Beatrice. "Children who never had opportunities now speak French, study science, and dream of a better future." "Exactly as we planned," Emeline said with satisfaction. "Real change, 1 child at a time." Theston watched his wife command the table with natural grace. The shy woman who had once accepted marriage out of duty had transformed into a confident matriarch, a respected educator, a transformative force in the community, and he found himself falling for her a little more each day. "Papa," Simon called, "when will I be able to visit the mines with you?" When you're 12, as promised, Theston replied. But only to learn the trade. Not to work. I want to be like you when I grow up. Theston's heart tightened. No, son. Be even better, kinder, wiser. Learn from my mistakes. Simon thought seriously for a moment. Then I'll be like you and Mama. Strong like you, kind like her. Eleanor chimed in, and I'll be a teacher like Aunt Mary. And I'll be... Grace scrunched up her face in thought. I'll be happy. The table erupted in warm laughter, and Theston exchanged a glance with Emeline. Happy, what a perfect goal. Years later, when Hudson Valley historians documented the influential families of the region, they would write about Baron Theston Vale and his Baroness, Lady Emeline, not just as mining pioneers or visionary educators. They would write about the unlikely couple who turned a marriage of convenience into a dynasty of love, about the English lord who left his homeland seeking fortune, but found something infinitely more valuable, about the orphan who lost everything but gained more than she ever dreamed. They would write about the school that educated generations, about the families saved from ruin, about the legacy of justice and compassion that blossomed from the ashes of tragedy. But above all, they would write about love, the kind of love that isn't born ready but is built brick by brick, choice by choice, day after day. The kind of love that not only withstands life's storms, but turns them into rainbows. That night, after putting the children to bed, Emeline and Theston retired to their chambers, the same room where they had truly become husband and wife a decade earlier. You know what I love most about you? Theston asked, gently untying the ribbons of her dress. What? Emeline smiled, turning to face him. That even after 10 years, 3 children, and hair beginning to show silver strands. He paused, tracing the line of her jaw with reverence. You still make my heart stop when you walk into a room. Liar, she laughed, but the blush on her cheeks betrayed her. I'm older now with the marks of motherhood. You're more beautiful, he corrected, kissing her deeply. Every line on your face tells our story. Every mark on your body carried our children. It's the map of our life together, and I wouldn't change a single detail. They made love that night as they always did, with the passion of lovers and the tenderness of partners who knew every curve, every sigh, every way to bring pleasure to one another. Afterwards, entwined in linen sheets, gazing at the moon through the windows, Emeline whispered, "Thank you." For what? For choosing me, even without knowing me. For loving me. For building all this with me. For being my home. Theston kissed her forehead, pulling her even closer. No, my love. Thank you. For making a lonely man believe in happiness again. For turning my house into a home. For giving me family, purpose, a love I didn't even know I needed so much. We were lucky, Emeline murmured sleepily. No, Theston corrected. We were blessed. And wise enough to recognize the blessing and care for it. They fell asleep like that as they did every night. Entwined, complete, grateful. And if they could return to that April afternoon of 1775, when a nervous uncle uttered the name of an unknown lord, they would do everything exactly the same. Because some stories don't need to begin with love, they just need to end with it. And the story of Emeline and Theston was far from over. It was only beginning to be written in the next generations, in the legacy of kindness they would leave, in the lives they touched, in the seeds of love they planted. Seeds that would bloom for centuries. True love is not born perfect. It's built with patience, nourished with respect, strengthened through challenges overcome together. And when it finally blooms, it transforms not just 2 hearts, but the world around them. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this romance. If this story touched your heart, don't keep that feeling to yourself. Subscribe to the channel to receive more stories that warm the soul and restore faith in true love. Turn on the notification bell, because every week we bring new emotional journeys you won't want to miss. And now I want to hear from you. What was the moment that moved you the most in this story? Leave your comment below sharing which scene stayed in your heart. I read every single one personally and love knowing what touches you most deeply. Until the next story, may your heart remain open to the love that transforms,